Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 waiver wire targets for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about prospects at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defensive positions as we approach Week 11 in order to not only give ourselves the best chance in winning in our Week 11 contest, but of course, bolster our rosters, give ourselves more depth for the weeks ahead in order to do the one exact goal we are all looking towards, winning a 2021 fantasy football championship. So of course, we're going to talk about some prospects. I'm going to give you guys my thought process and opinions, talk about statistics to justify the reasoning as to why I am going ahead and picking up said players. Now, the last couple weeks of fantasy football, week 9 and 10, have been extremely underwhelming in terms of the performances that have been put forth by some of our stud players. But I want to remind everyone that 2021 was expected to be a regressionary season in terms of total points scored, mainly because 2020 was such a record-breaking season. In fact, last season, the NFL had the highest scoring season of all time in terms of regular season points with 12,692. And the record prior to that was in 2013. And imagine, it was broken just last season, and we were expecting something similar to that. Obviously, we were getting ahead of ourselves. But on top of that, there was another record that was broken last season. Total touchdowns scored in a singular season, which was 1,473. Now, that was a record broken from the 2018 season. But again, we anticipated regression, and that's what we're seeing in the last couple weeks. As teams are not scoring as much, we're seeing a lot of one-sided affairs, and we're seeing contests in which our fantasy prospects are just not producing enough. Either way, just wanted to go ahead and remind you guys that yes, though we are not seeing great performances, hopefully we are going to potentially see them get back on track in the coming weeks, find ourselves some fantasy value, and of course, win ourselves some contests here. Before we begin today's video, for those of you who are new and you have not yet already subscribed to the channel, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season, whether it is waiver wire pickups, rankings throughout the weeks, live streams. Last Friday, I posted my rest of season strength of schedule video. I always want to update those for those of you who are looking to see what matchups and which players you should be going after for the rest of the season who could give you the best chance of winning a 2021 fantasy football season. I'll go ahead and post that right up there. It's typically a great series that I like to go ahead and give you guys more perspective in regards to which players should be having the greatest overall opportunity in the fantasy football playoffs in order to help you capture a championship. So go ahead and check that out if you have not yet already. Also, another reminder, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, it's another way to play fantasy football via weekly contests, pick'ems, and so much fun to be had. I'm not even kidding. Last night, it was a roller coaster of emotions, and I wanted to go ahead and in the last couple weeks, I've actually caught fire in terms of the weekly contests, and hopefully we'll see you guys compete in them. If you want to go ahead and join, you can sign up today using promo code Andrew. Your first deposit will be matched up to $100 by Underdog Fantasy. Extremely generous offer. So again, down in the description, there's the link. Use promo code Andrew. Thank you very much. But in the last couple weeks, I've caught fire in terms of the contest. So sitting in around like the midway through the second quarter, I find myself in 6th place overall. You know, I have a great roster: Tyreek Hill, Darrell Williams, Mecole Hardman, and Bryan Edwards. My goodness, am I feeling like I'm about to win this whole contest? Then we go a little bit closer, and more points are trickling in. And Andrew's in 4th place, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is it. This is the week I am pulling it off. But then all of a sudden, Mecole Hardman is given that little touch forward pass by Patrick Mahomes. He runs to the goal line, and instead of diving for the pylon, this gentleman runs out at the 1-yard line. And my entire day is crushed, ruined, and then we proceed to see more players like Byron Pringle score and just a bunch of points that shouldn't have come, and then that leaves me in 69th place. Quite the number, but either way, still took home some money, and I still found myself a really good roster. But Mecole Hardman, my goodness, is that going to hurt? Either way, I'm telling you, there's a lot of fun to be had via Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code Andrew today, again, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100. A lot of fun to be had. And unfortunately, I went from the top to not too far down. Again, I am progressing every week. I'm getting in that like 100 range. I've broken to the top 100. Tonight's the night. The Rams versus the 49ers. I'm capturing that number 1 seed. I will be drafting a team at the end of today's video. If you guys haven't checked that out, go ahead and wait until then and, kind of get my thought process and strategies as I approach that. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get into our Week 11 waiver wire targets for this week. We begin with the running back position, but first and foremost, I want to mention if A.J. Dillon is somehow, some way available in your league, he should be already picked up. I know he's currently rostered in 72% of Yahoo leagues, but again, he's coming off of a 25.8 point fantasy point performance, and Aaron Jones is dealing with an MCL injury that most likely is going to hold him out for 1 to 2 weeks, which of course, due to the aspirations of the Green Bay Packers, they're most likely going to hold him out for even longer, but we'll see. Either way, A.J. Dillon must be rostered. I should see that number at 100% by next Tuesday. So either way, another running back I wanted to mention, Chuba Hubbard. For some reason, he's only rostered in 50% of leagues. I know Christian McCaffrey's back, but if every single one of you who are watching that Carolina Panthers game notice, Christian McCaffrey's going to the blue tent. He's getting his his quad massaged. The hamstring is still something that is present. We have to be careful. Do not drop Chuba Hubbard. And if he has been dropped in your league and you have an extra spot there, maybe go ahead and pick him up. I mean, the guy vultured a touchdown. There's always potential for value going forward. Either way, now that we've mentioned those respective prospects, I'm going to go ahead and talk about players that are currently rostered in less than 35% of fantasy leagues at the running back position. Often some of these guys, rostered in less than 5% of leagues. But either way, let's go ahead and talk about these players. Number one is Rhamondre Stevenson of the Patriots. Now, going into this week, of course, we all knew that Damien Harris was going to miss due to a concussion and was already deemed out. Rhamondre Stevenson was on that game time decision bubble, but was obviously prior to Sunday's contest given the okay and ready to go. I was asked so many questions about Rhamondre Stevenson yesterday during the live stream again every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kickoff with Kirchhoff. I was asked so many questions about Rhamondre Stevenson, and I'm so happy that we all played him accordingly because he came out with 25.4 fantasy points, 20 carries for 100 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 4 catches on 5 targets for 14 yards. Dude, even if Damien Harris comes back this upcoming week, his role is never going to be the same. I mean, Rhamondre Stevenson is dominating the early down work. We see Brandon Bolden getting a lot of work in that 3rd/4th down opportunities. I think Brandon Bolden got himself, 8 total snaps on 3rd and 4th downs. Rhamondre Stevenson and him are probably going to be more and more involved. And as this team is a run-first offense, I think there's a chance in which 2 running backs per week could find value. He's currently only rostered in 32% of leagues, but certainly needs to be on your roster going forward as this team is continuing to make a playoff push and running the ball down the defenders' throats easily, especially considering they did that against Cleveland. It's quite impressive. Moving on to our second running back, we have D'Onta Foreman of the Tennessee Titans. Now, D'Onta Foreman has moved around throughout his career. Of course, he began with the Houston Texans, had a season-ending injury, then has popped up in a couple different places, but now finds himself in Tennessee once again. And, a couple weeks back, we were talking about Adrian Peterson, Jeremy McNichols being the lead players, but, it seems to me like D'Onta Foreman is actually going to be the lead back for this team. Had himself 11 carries for 30 yards, 2 total receptions on 2 targets for 48 receiving yards, 8.8 total fantasy points. During yesterday's game against the New Orleans Saints, he played the most snaps amongst all running backs on that team. He played 35% of them, while Adrian Peterson played about 33%, and Jeremy McNichols played around the 20% range. But either way, if D'Onta Foreman is going to be the lead back for this team and is going to dominate in terms of total carries, then by all means, he's got a lot of value going forward for a team that is so heavily predicated on running the ball. If he can find himself on the goal line, D'Onta Foreman could have a lot of value going forward, and that is why he's our number 2. Moving on to number 3, we have Wayne Gallman. Wayne Gallman is a former running back of the New York Giants last season. He obviously, this offseason, was with the 49ers. He was cut because, of course, Elijah Mitchell has stepped up as a main back there, but found himself getting picked up by the Atlanta Falcons. And though many of us thought, there's a potential of him having some work, Cordero Patterson pretty much snuffed all of that potential. But now that Cordero Patterson is going down with an ankle injury, and one that could end up persisting and being something that holds him out for a couple weeks here. We're talking about Wayne Gallman, who played and had 15 carries for 55 total rushing yards, 1 catch for 21 yards, and 8.1 fantasy points. Yes, in a blowout. But before we get ahead of ourselves and start talking about the potential of, there's still Mike Davis in that backfield, Landry. Well, in fact, Wayne Gallman, prior to the garbage time where Josh Rosen came in, Wayne Gallman already had more carries and touches than Mike Davis. I think we may see a transition in which Wayne Gallman actually gets majority of the touches with Cordero Patterson gone in comparison to Mike Davis, though we thought he was going to be a great option this season, hasn't really meshed with this offense. I think Wayne Gallman is a fantastic potential priority pickup for those of you who have lost the value of a Cordero Patterson, as he has already shown going back to last season that he can certainly be a 10-plus point running back per week, can be involved on the goal line, through the air, and be a great overall play for the Falcons. Moving on to Ty Johnson, our number 4. Though Ty Johnson had a little bit of an underwhelming week here, still had himself 8 targets, 5 catches, 36 receiving yards, 6.3 fantasy points. If we're talking about a full PPR scoring format, Ty Johnson, who is currently rostered in 19% of leagues, of course, he is, he has more of a rostership percentage than D'Onta Foreman, Wayne Gallman, and the next running back that I'm going to talk about combined. But again, when you're getting that much opportunity in the receiving game, a full PPR format impact is going to be huge for a running back like Ty Johnson. Now, the overall upside of his play is obviously going to be diminished when Michael Carter has great performances, but my only concern is, yes, Tevin Coleman did return last week, and there's a potential that he could dig into Ty Johnson's work. I'm thinking Ty Johnson's PPR reception work, considering the overall baseline in terms of negative game scripts, Joe Flacco at quarterback, who loves to target running backs. Of course, we go back to the years of Forsett, Danny Woodhead, Kyle Juszczyk. Ty Johnson is in line for a good couple weeks here, as he has already proven to be consistent, but will continue to be and maintain that consistency as we persist. Moving on to Matt Breida, our final running back option for this week. Matt Breida had himself an early touchdown in that Buffalo Bills game, but only had himself 6 total touches. 3 on the ground for 28 yards. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 22 yards, 2 total touchdowns for 16.5 fantasy points. I don't know if this is going to be something that continues as the weeks proceed. And of course, we saw an amalgamation of running back rotation with Singletary obviously still scoring. We saw, of course, Zach Moss score a touchdown. Breida scored 2. The running back position against that New York Jets defense, it's not really much of a surprise. Of course, when Mike White's throwing 4 interceptions, it certainly helps. But if Matt Breida is going to be something of a prospect that we have to take a look at and potentially roster for some upside value via the Buffalo Bills backfield, I don't mind it as our 5th option here. All right, the last 2 guys I want to mention before we close out the running back section are Boston Scott and Jordan Howard. They play against New Orleans this upcoming week. It's a little bit of an underwhelming matchup because how good New Orleans has been in terms of stopping the run. But they're currently rostered in 32% and 49% of leagues. With Miles Sanders potentially coming back, I don't know what to expect of them, so I'm not completely 100% sure to suggest them here. We'll see how it persists next week and then the week after. All right, moving on to the wide receiver position. Now, a lot of the wide receivers that I'm going to mention today are guys that I've already mentioned in the past because, again, I don't really want to take a stab at one of these players that is sitting at the very bottom of the barrel, has only 0% rostership, and I'm not really interested in taking a grab at that. So we're going to talk about players that we've already mentioned that are still widely available. In 50% of the leagues, Rashod Bateman is still not rostered yet. 6 catches for 80 yards, 11 fantasy points last week in a full PPR scoring format. I think he's had 4 consecutive performances of over 10 fantasy points. Should be rostered. The upcoming schedule is extremely advantageous. I talked about it on my rest of season strength of schedule video for those of you who haven't checked that out already. Also, Elijah Moore, our number 2. He was the number 1 last week, and he was the thumbnail for last week's video. Though he had an extremely difficult overall, I'd say, matchup against the Buffalo Bills defense, him and Joe Flacco found a lot of garbage time production. He is currently available in 50% of leagues. Again, 44 receiving yards and a touchdown, 11.9 fantasy points. For him, that's pretty much 4 weeks in a row of 10 fantasy points per game. A lot of potential going forward. These rookie wide receivers, though they are playing about 50% of the snaps, they're getting themselves opportunities and targets and scoring a lot of points that could be of value in weeks ahead. Moving on to our number 3, Darnell Mooney, a second-year wide receiver. The last time we saw him was in Week 9 when they take on the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday night. Obviously, they had a bye week last week, but the last time we saw Darnell Mooney had himself 3 catches for 41 yards, a receiving touchdown, and a rushing touchdown for 19.1 fantasy points. Last time we saw Allen Robinson, he was dealing with a bit of an injury. If, in fact, Darnell Mooney is going to be the lead receiving option for the Chicago Bears football team, who looked significantly better the last time we saw them going forward, I think Darnell Mooney has a lot of value, currently rostered in only 45% of leagues, should be addressed and picked up. Moving on to Robby Anderson, of course, Robby Anderson showed a little bit of a spark of life when Cam Newton came into the game, threw him a touchdown, had himself 11.7 fantasy points. I mean, if Robby Anderson is going to be reborn with Cam Newton in this lineup, then by all means, this is going to be a fantastic transition for the rest of the season. Of course, he's currently only rostered in 39% of leagues, so if he's available in your league, address that, pick him up. The final option I wanted to mention here in regards to our top 5 wide receivers is Bryan Edwards of the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, when I look at this team, of course, Darren Waller disappeared, but of course, Hunter Renfrow seems to be the mainstay every single week. Bryan Edwards had himself 3 catches, 88 yards, a receiving touchdown on a big play. If he's going to be a deeper threat along with Deshaun Jackson, or at least see himself enough opportunity to find himself as a viable prospect going forward, he's only rostered in 18% of leagues and isn't a bad option going forward. The last player I wanted to mention, who isn't on the list that is an honorable mention in this regard, is Marcus Johnson. He's a former wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts of last year. He's currently on the Tennessee Titans. He had himself 5 catches for 100 receiving yards. One of those catches going for 50 yards, but if he's going to get himself more and more involvement in that Tennessee Titans offense now that Julio is out, I think there's a lot of potential for Marcus Johnson. Again, he's only rostered in 0% of leagues. So he's widely available for those of you who are in a deeper 12-team, 14-team league. Keep an eye out for a guy like Marcus Johnson. Moving on, let's talk about the tight end position. Again, these are players you're going to continue to see every single week. As I mentioned, Dan Arnold every week, but Dan Arnold comes out again, has himself consistent targets, a lot of receiving yards, and gets himself over 10 fantasy points this week. 11.2 with the 2-point conversion that he scored. Dan Arnold's becoming 10 points per week. And if he is not rostered on your league or potentially on your own respective team, that needs to be addressed. He's only rostered in 26% of leagues. Dan Arnold's becoming a top 12, tight end. Going forward, that this is really the only guy that Trevor Lawrence seems to be comfortable throwing the ball to. So we're buying in on it. Dan Arnold's our number one. Number two is Tyler Conklin. Though he only had 11 receiving yards, he dominated the goal line work. He got a lot of play action work, 2 receiving touchdowns. Dalvin Cook wasn't able to punch it in, but Tyler Conklin was able to get the job done. Only rostered in 30% of leagues, coming off a 14.6 fantasy point performance. Again, we've talked about him in the last couple weeks. He's seen consistent yardage. He's seen consistent targets, and that's all we could ask for. The touchdowns, the upside, that is always going to be there for the tight end position. Either way, a great option going forward. And to be honest, now that we've seen Tyler Conklin had such great performances, this is why we were so excited about Irv Smith, because we knew that the tight end position for the Vikings was so valuable. But of course, Irv Smith, the season-ending injury in the preseason. Either way, Conklin, a great option going forward. Our number 3 is Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. Now, the last time we saw him was on that Monday Night Football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 8 targets, 6 catches, 87 yards, 11.7 fantasy points. I mean, again, this is becoming one of Justin Fields' favorite targets. This offense is using a lot of 3 tight end sets with Cole Kmet, Jimmy Graham, Jesse James. With so many tight ends on the field, of course, it is just that much easier to just throw it to your safety blanket, find these big-bodied targets, and just put it on them. Of course, Cole Kmet is always going to have the upside of a touchdown, but if he's going to see these kind of target counts going forward, I think there's a lot of potential for this young tight end. Moving on to Gerald Everett. Somehow, some way, Gerald Everett led the receiving work for the Seattle Seahawks yesterday. Not DK Metcalf, not Tyler Lockett, not somebody out of the backfield, but Gerald Everett had garnered 8 total targets, leading to 8 receptions and 63 yards. If this is something that is going to persist, then by all means, I want a piece of it. That is why I mentioned Gerald Everett as a potential option. I mean, again, the Seattle Seahawks, they have used the tight end position in the past, but really not to this variety and this volume. Hopefully, this is something that stays around. But of course, if it's going to take away from DK Metcalf and Lockett, I hope it doesn't. But either way, an option here. The final player I wanted to mention is Adam Trautman. In the last couple weeks, Adam Trautman has seen a lot of targets. In the last 3 weeks alone, had himself, I think, 7 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets. I mean, when you're getting a total of 20 targets in the last 3 games, that is a number that I want to follow and trail. Considering he is only rostered in 5% of leagues, we know that Trevor Siemian is actually going to get the job done there for the New Orleans Saints as he's putting them in positions to win and, of course, compete. I think Adam Trautman is a great overall option if, in fact, you are in a deeper league and you are desperate for a tight end. I know he hasn't had the greatest overall performances, but it's trending in a direction in which potentially late season push here in some good matchups could have himself a lot of overall fantasy value. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the quarterbacks. Beginning with our number 1. Yes, he's back. It is Cam Newton, Superman himself. I mean, did he show out or what? Coming in on a short week, immediately comes in, dominates the goal line work, scores a touchdown, then throws himself a touchdown. I mean, he had 11.72 fantasy points in just a couple plays. Really just, had more points than a lot of other quarterbacks who played the entirety of their overall contest. But either way, Cam Newton is going to be this kind of a threat all season long. Regardless of the matchup, we know he's probably going to, feel like he's at home. And he's going to get back to his days of dominating defenses, of course, running the ball and finding a lot of fantasy value. This upcoming week, they take on the Washington football team. Though the Washington football team looked fantastic against Tom Brady, they will be missing Chase Young for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. I think regardless of what team they're playing against, Cam Newton has a lot of explosive value, especially in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Moving on to our number 2, we have Justin Fields. I mentioned it already. Justin Fields is coming off the bye week, currently only rostered in 25% of leagues. He should be sought after. Again, he's coming off of a performance in which he had 291 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, 45 rushing yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. This week, it takes on the Baltimore Ravens. I'm not worried about the matchup. Of course, we saw the Miami Dolphins really put it on them. I think Justin Fields is getting more and more comfortable, and as the weeks progress here, it's going to become that much easier for him to impose his will on respective defenses and find success. The mobility of his potential play, similar to Cam Newton, is so valuable in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. So that is why he's our number 2 option. Moving on to Tua Tagovailoa. Now, Tua came into that game, regardless of what happened. I don't really know what the idea is of not playing Tua, if he's capable of playing. I know the head coach for the Dolphins said that he was having a hard time throughout the week driving the ball down the field. He looked good when he came in. And, of course, there's a reason why they didn't put Jacoby Brissett back out into the game when he was healthy and ready to go. Tua takes on the New York Jets this upcoming week. He's only rostered in 23% of leagues because a lot of people thought he was injured, in which he was. But he potentially can come in here and find a lot of value. I mean, in the short amount of time he played, he had himself 158 passing yards, had himself a rushing touchdown on the goal line for 12 fantasy points. Against the Jets, seems like a pretty good option to me. Moving on to Mac Jones, our number 4. Mac Jones takes on the Atlanta Falcons. Currently only rostered in 28% of leagues, coming off of a 3-touchdown week. The only thing that concerns me about Mac Jones is if, in fact, he is going back to, of course, handing off the football and they're scoring, a boatload of touchdowns there, and they're not scoring 40 points, then perhaps those touchdowns aren't going to be in his favor. He obviously once per game will throw a touchdown. Hunter Henry is pretty much automatic in that regard. But the one that Kendrick Bourne and the excess targets that he is sending out via that great matchup and blowout against the Cleveland Browns may not be as consistent. Hopefully it's going to be as we persist here, and that is why I mentioned him as our number 4. Number 5 is Daniel Jones coming off of the bye week with Saquon returning. Hopefully Sterling Shepard, Tony, Golladay, Evan Ingram, everybody in this roster, if they are fully healthy and surrounding Daniel Jones, he should be able to make a late season push and find a lot of fantasy value. I know he takes on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this upcoming week, but I'm really not worried about it. He has found himself a lot of success against this defense, even last season. Daniel Jones, against some of these tougher matchups, has found himself a lot of success, and hopefully will do that in the upcoming weeks. Moving on to our special teams and defensive positions, beginning with our top defensive waiver wire pickup. Our number 1 is the Miami Dolphins as they take on, of course, the New York Jets defense. With Joe Flacco, Mike White, Zach Wilson, regardless of who it's going to be, there's a lot of value to be had here. On top of the fact that the Miami Dolphins have gone back-to-back weeks of having incredible defensive performances. 17 points in terms of total fantasy point performance against the Houston Texans, turned that around and went for 18 points against Lamar Jackson's led Baltimore Ravens offense. I can only imagine what they're going to be capable of doing against the New York Jets. That's why they're our number 1 pickup on the week at defense. Number 2 is the Cleveland Browns. Again, the Cleveland Browns are probably really upset about how they got destroyed by Bill Belichick in that New England Patriots, offense and defense. But they get to take their anger out on the Detroit Lions this week. The Detroit Lions somehow, some way, tied against Mason Rudolph's-led Pittsburgh Steelers. Unbelievably terrible play across the board. A lot of missed field goals, a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of fumbles that made mistakes. People were beating themselves in that game. Either way, I think the Cleveland Browns defense will come out to just completely dominate this Detroit Lions offense, put up a couple points, and force Jared Goff to make some mistakes here. Moving on, we have the Carolina Panthers, who in the last couple weeks have lost a little bit of their flair. Early on in the season, they were 70% rostered, with dominating against some of the easier matchups. And after that, they kind of fell off, and they're currently only rostered in 29% of leagues. But in the last 3 weeks alone, 11 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points. That is great overall production. They're coming off of a very high momentum week in which they beat a very good team like the Arizona Cardinals, despite how shorthanded they were. With Cam Newton back there, the defense is going to be, off the field, for an extended amount of time, as the offense will be able to sustain drives, find value there. Carolina looking on the up and up. Let's move on to the kicker position, beginning with Randy Bullock. Again, I mention Randy Bullock almost every week, maybe once every other week. It's a bi-weekly thing. Randy Bullock is only rostered in 22% of leagues. I know he had a terrible Week 9 performance of 4 fantasy points, but he had himself another double-digit fantasy performance in Week 10. This is something that we have seen multiple times and on a streak here in the last month of the season. Randy Bullock, a great option for the Tennessee Titans offense, who, of course, doesn't have Derrick Henry, doesn't have Julio Jones, and will be kicking a lot of field goals in the coming weeks. Moving on to Jason Sanders, our number 2, another Dolphin that I wanted to mention in terms of the special teams. Jason Sanders was the number 1 overall kicker in fantasy last season. This year, he kind of fell off. The offense wasn't able to find much success. Obviously, they started 1-8. But when I look at the matchup that the Miami Dolphins have this week against the New York Jets, it seems to me like this is going to be a game in which, even if they're not able to score in the end zone consistently, the field goals are going to be there. Jason Sanders, a great overall play. And currently available in 75% of fantasy leagues on Yahoo right now. All right. Now that we've mentioned all of our waiver wire targets for Week 11 of the 2021 fantasy football season, I, of course, want to go ahead, draft a team via Underdog Fantasy, and capture myself the number 1 overall place on tonight's contest, the Monday night matchup between the Los Angeles Rams, my Los Angeles Rams, and the San Francisco 49ers. So let's go ahead and do that before we end today's video. So as you can see here, we are here at UnderdogFantasy.com. Again, if you haven't yet already signed up, use promo code Andrew with your first deposit. Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100. Again, extremely generous. It's a $5 buy-in. There are currently only 1,200 potential spots available. The prize pool is $25K if and when it falls out. First place, that's what we're always searching for. And that's hopefully what we're going to be able to do. So we're going to go ahead and hop into this contest. Again, just want to remind you guys, you're competing against 3 people in an initial draft. You are drafting 4 players, only flex positions: running back, wide receiver, and tight end. You also have to have rostership on both teams. So after you build your roster, after you draft against these potential other teams, what do I get? The second pick? I don't mind that. You're going to have to, of course, build a roster that hopefully competes against thousands of others and separates yourself. Considering it's only a $5 buy-in, again, you typically want to go ahead and draft multiple teams, at least 2 of them. Of course, it's a matter of RNG as to whether or not you get the first, second, or third pick. Typically, I see a very equal distribution. Some weeks I get the first pick 4 times in a row, and that's even better, especially in matchups in which you can get a Cooper Kupp with your first overall pick. But in this regard, when we have the second overall pick, I know the draft starts in about 25 seconds here, but just want to give you my thoughts. I'm looking at the running back position for Darrell Henderson. That's probably going to be my second pick. Now, after it comes back, there's a potential I either get Deebo Samuel, Elijah Mitchell, or George Kittle. In my opinion, that sets me up for a lot of success. After it goes back to the first overall selection, he'll most likely get Brandon Ayuk, Van Jefferson, which will leave me Tyler Higbee with my 3rd overall pick. I will have already rostered at least 1 49er and 1 Ram, and it's just about determining who my final pick is. And hopefully, that is going to be a player like Sony Michel, just in case I miss any value from Darrell Henderson. Again, the final picks are typically going to be the make or break. Wow, that guy immediately drafted. Holy moly. We're going to take Elijah Mitchell here. So I'm all in on the running back position tonight, hoping for as much value as I can potentially get there. Again, a lot of this draft is taking what it's given to you. I really didn't have, of course, there could be a draft where I take George Kittle at the number 2 spot and then follow it up with Elijah Mitchell there, but just depends on what you want to potentially proceed with. If this guy leaves me Brandon Ayuk, that may be even better for me in this entire reality. But with, of course, Robert Woods being out, there's a potential that Tyler Higbee gets more utilization in the passing game. But let's see here. 13 seconds left. I don't really want to take the risk on OBJ. Maybe I'll go ahead and draft 1 team and have him on roster, but it seems like it's more of a risk than a high enough reward, considering it is his first game. And this guy's going to auto pick, and he'll take, he took OBJ. It's between Brandon Ayuk and it's between Tyler Higbee for me. I'm going to go with Brandon Ayuk. That gives me really good overall upside, in my opinion. I've got 3 great picks already. I just need to make sure that my final pick scores a touchdown. Really, that's it. That is what determines success here. And when I look at the available players, we have Sony Michel, Jeff Wilson Jr., Ayuk, Sherfield, Travis Benjamin, Dwelly. There aren't really good options. It's between Jeff Wilson either stealing a touchdown or Sony Michel stealing some work. And I'm going to say that Sony Michel has an opportunity here, whether it's in garbage time because of a positive game script or a negative game script. We'll take Sony Michel. We have 3 running backs. We have the 3 main running backs in this matchup. And we got Brandon Ayuk. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Quick and easy. I'm ready for tonight's game and tonight's contest. I have a couple more entries that I got to obviously make for this. But again, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about our top 36 running back rankings for Week 11. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.